Hey,
Night
Trav.
school.
Night
What's up,
school.
dude?
Not
Been a
much.
couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
3, actually. So last week we had Sean on,
No. Well, I guess we
right?
filmed 2 weeks ago, but maybe it's coming out a week ago.
No, yeah. No, I'm speaking in real time here, not podcast time. So
Okay.
2 weeks ago we had Sean on. Last week we took off, and then
Yeah.
so it's been 3 weeks since we did this.
Yeah. And those 3 weeks we've been, like 3 weeks ago we recorded part 1 of this.
Right.
We've just been reading this.
This book
Since
for
then.
pretty much all year.
It's been a decade, nearly.
This book is extremely difficult to read.
Mm-hmm. It's been hard. It's been difficult, and we've rescheduled several times
Yep.
because there's just... The chapters that we've been reading are just all about 3 specific conjunctions. Uranus and Pluto in conjunction, Saturn and Pluto in conjunction, Jupiter and Uranus and Pluto. And it's just like 80 pages of each of those,
Right.
of just example after example of like, here's these 2 archetypes associated with these planets, and here's how they interacted at this time. And here again, in this year, we see, of course, the archetypes of these 2 planets.
Right.
So it's a lot of that. So it's hard to get
So
through.
because he was like 30 years of research that he did to write this
20.
damn book.
I think 20.
So, and he's setting out to list all of, what's up? Oh yeah, that is on. Good call. Dope.
No longer? Cool.
He's setting out to give a bunch of concrete examples of how the conjunctions of certain planets result in a certain character of events happening on Earth, which is interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes it hard for me to read is that each planet has a certain personality, but the way to understand the personality of each planet is to understand the sort of events that happen when we are aligned with that planet, right? Or what?
Either when the planet is aligned with where the planets were when you were born, if it's something that's relevant just to you, or when the planets are aligned with each other in relation to the Earth, if we're talking about just something on a global scale.
Right.
Yeah.
So and you've read further than me. So you've read about Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter. I've only read about Uranus, Pluto, and Saturn. And it's not even that we're learning to understand each planet's personality on its own, but we're learning to understand the chemistry that results from 2 planets being in conjunction or opposition with each other. So it's like, which makes sense because you could get to know somebody well by seeing how they interact with all the different people that they know, like their chemistry with all the different people that they associate with.
Yeah.
That's how you could get to know somebody for real. You know, you have one conversation with somebody, you know how they act with you, but you don't really know them until you see how they interact with their parents and their other friends and strangers and enemies, and then you understand their whole personality. So I like learning about all the oppositions and conjunctions, but he's described the basic personalities of each of these 3 or 4 planets that we're reading about, and now he's giving examples of how those personalities play out in events. But the events are proving to us that there is a correlation between our alignments with those planets and the things that happen, which proves the astrological worldview or provides evidence for it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the evidence itself, if you believe in the astrological worldview, is the description of that planet's personality. So it's like, I could tell you Evan's this kind of person, and then I could prove it by showing you his interactions with people, but those interactions with people are what define his personality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's fuzzy to read. It's like, it's not a science that can just be understood objectively. It's like a subjective thing that you need to get a feel for. Kind of like you can't just say, well, purple is this and red is this and blue is this. There's gray lines there. What exactly is red, purple, and blue?
Yeah.
And there's a certain personality that you could say blue's the calmest, purple's the deepest, and red is the most romantic of those 3 colors. But they're not concrete, objective descriptions of those colors. They're the archetypal qualities of those colors. So it's just a weird science to learn about and grasp. And I have been convinced that astrology is a valid science, but it's different than, it's not biology where you learn about processes, label the individual elements of that process, understand why they operate the way that they do. It's not just objective information. It's like these subjective descriptions of something that feels like intellectually distant.
Yeah. It's a lot less concrete. It's a lot more fluid. And I thought that was really interesting thought, thinking about the planets, is like it's like we're getting to know these characters by seeing their interactions, by seeing these scenes of them interacting with the other planetary characters.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a cool way to look at it. And that, like,
Right.
just like we've discussed, that a person is kind of a different thing when they're with different people. That I'm a different.
Yeah, we talked about that when
Yeah.
we were reading Andy Stanley
Yeah.
or Timothy Keller. I don't remember which one.
One of them.
Or
But
Timothy Kelly, maybe.
But yeah, like you and I together are something different than you alone and me alone, or the two of us separately,
Right.
or me and Evan.
Or
like,
when me and you are in opposition and we're arguing, you're going to see a very different slice of our personality than when
Interesting. Yeah.
you and I are in conjunction and we're just vibing, playing
Right.
Mario Kart. You're going to see a different Raleigh and a different Travis. So it's hard to prove the astrological worldview. I always think of my buddy Kevin. He's a pharmacist that I'm friends with in Spokane.
Yeah,
Very objective thinker.
Yeah, Kevin Keller. His last name's Kelly.
Yeah,
that's
Kevin
good.
Kelly.
Yeah.
I always think of him when I'm learning about weird shit like this because I'm always thinking, could I make this make sense to Kevin? Like when it comes to Jesus principles as a Christian, I'm like, could I make this relevant to Kevin? You know, because he's such an objective thinker and he's super smart. And he's a skeptic by trade, not about all things, you know, but it's his default. And so I'm thinking, like, if I was going to describe the astrological worldview or the archetypes of astrology specifically to Kevin, I could tell him Saturn has kind of this quality, Pluto kind of this. Then he'd say, prove it. And I'd say, well, look at these events in history. Say, well, you can't prove objectively that that event aligns with the personality of Saturn or the personality of Pluto because those events define our perception of those planets. So then the way, you know what I'm saying?
Not
It's like,
really.
It's like I can't say it's as simple as when Saturn and Uranus are in conjunction, an earthquake happens right when they conjunct or whatever that word would be. It's not that objective, saying, well, something kind of with this sort of quality will happen. So it's like, well, how do you know? Well, because those things happen when they're in conjunction. It's like, okay, well, where's the proof? But the proof is perceived subjectively as you read through these events. Like,
yeah, and I think maybe the way that if you're trying to prove it to Kevin, maybe the way that it would be better to go about that is he's Richard Tarnas. He mentions in like the parts that we read in the last few weeks. Wait, God, I lost it. What was it?
well, I think you might have been about to bring up the synchronic and diachronic, like the so he's giving a bunch of examples of things that happened all over the world when one certain conjunction happens at the same time, which he calls a synchronic events. He calls synchronic events. Dude, we're gonna sound like fucking morons tonight.
I don't know these
This
words.
shit is so hard to grasp.
Yeah.
So an example of synchronic events would be during this technological revolution in Europe, there was this ideological revolution going on in China, both of the same quality, both associated with the personality of Saturn, and they had nothing to do with each other. So the fact that they both happened during this conjunction, independent of each other, is an indicator that there was really a certain quality of that time. And then the diachronic events are, so every 40 years when Saturn and Uranus conjunct, or whatever that amount of time would be, an event of this certain quality happens. So diachronic is every time this astrological aspect comes around, something of this certain quality seems to happen. And synchronic is at the same time, these multiple events happen in different parts of the world,
Cool. I didn't get those
independent of
words.
each
That's
other.
great. Yeah.
So that isn't what you were about to say.
No,
there.
that's not what I was
going
going
to
to say, but I do not remember what I was going to say.
Nice.
Because he's referenced that, like, he's taking it, because it sounds like he's taking, for example, he's taking all instances where there was a significant documented, some kind of liberal revolution that happened, some sort of upheaval that was, that felt more liberal than conservative. That, like, if you look at all those revolutions, you can see that on a scatter plot that they're going to line up with when the planets of, I think that's Uranus and Pluto would be lined up when they would be aligned, that you would see that there is a relationship there. And he doesn't have any of those sorts of graphs, but he says a couple times that, like, if you look at all the instances of this type of thing happening, you'll see that most of the instances line up with these planetary alignments.
Right, right.
And so if you had a graph like that, I think that that would probably be a really helpful way to convince a total skeptic of it. Like,
Right.
look how often these line up with this.
Yeah.
And I would love, that'd be dope if there's could be like some graphs of that. I'd love to see that.
There is graphs here and there in the book. I'm surprised we haven't seen any graphs like that. I feel like we
Yeah.
will, because he'll put natal charts and stuff like that in there.
Yeah, there's charts of like some famous people, and then he has like
Yeah.
just lists of here's every time that there was a conjunction, a square,
Yeah. Opposition.
opposition. Yeah, like he has lists of all those and the dates that each of them happened. But yeah, no graphs like that. That'd be
Right.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Do you want to start by defining the personalities of Uranus, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter?
sure,
Since
sure.
we're talking about those, and then we can kind of get into what happens when they are in conjunction or opposition.
Yeah, yeah. So
You're going to be
Jupiter-
carrying this shit, by the way.
That's okay. The first chapter talks a lot about Uranus and Pluto specifically. Pluto seems to be, the way it's described is like when it is interacting with another planetary archetype, it's amplifying, it like makes that thing more intense, makes that thing more extreme. If it's a violent thing, it makes that thing more violent. If it's a revolutionary thing, it makes that thing a bigger revolution. It seems to amplify whatever it's, which is interesting because like that doesn't seem like much of a personality unless it's, I guess, like a hype man. It's something like that.
It's funny you say hype man because I thought of Giovanni immediately when you just said that.
Really?
That like whatever mood
Yeah.
I'm in, I'm more of it around Giovanni. Like if I swoop Giovanni and I'm in an angry mood, I know I can just scream rant, and it won't bother him a bit.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, if I'm super happy,
Yeah. Yeah. Uranus is revolutionary. It seems to be kind of liberal. It seems to be like awakenings and like people like railing against the man, raging against the machine kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
all of that seems very Uranus.
Right.
And then second chapter that we read is about Saturn and Pluto. Saturn is kind of the opposite. It feels more like conservatism. It feels more like order. It feels like repression in some cases.
Constraint.
It's getting things more in line, getting things more solidified.
Yeah.
Whereas Uranus is more breaking things up and breaking down the structures and more towards the chaos side of things.
Right.
And then Jupiter seems to be associated with high culture and high knowledge, like shifts in culture or shifts in what we understand or what we think about the structure of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jupiter relates specifically to knowledge.
Knowledge and culture, it seems
Okay.
like, is the main two things that are referred to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the book basically just has, it's a ton of examples. And what we're saying is that like it gets a little bit, it's a grind to read through because it's just example after example. And so there's a mountain of evidence here that there are things that line up.
Right.
And I wrote down a few of those. So you want to just start with Uranus, Pluto, go through those?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So Uranus, Pluto, let me see, I will pull up. We got a chart here of every time that it lined up. So,
Right on 165.
yeah. So from 1960 to 1972, Uranus and Pluto were in conjunction. And those sort of ranges, the way that works, conjunction would technically be on the circle of the natal chart. When two things are at the same point on that circle, it means that they are aligned in relation to the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
That if you were to look out, I think it's east
Yeah,
or
that's
west.
true,
I'm not
yeah.
sure exactly how that works, but they're aligned with relation to the Earth.
Yeah.
And these archetypal relationships between these planets, they seem to get more intense. The results that you expect from those two planets interacting get most intense the closer to the conjunction you get. But for the purposes of this book, he talks about 15-degree alignments. So like a 15-degree slice of that
So
circle.
7.5 degrees in either direction of the
yeah.
exact conjunction. It's considered the conjunction range.
Yeah, and that seems to be what he usually refers to, although not always. Like I feel like there were times when he said
Like a couple degrees.
Yeah,
right?
well,
Like less.
yeah, I mean, he gets more specific if it gets more and more intense the closer it gets. He's like, now in this case, we were like right there. We were right
Yeah.
on it. So he
Yeah.
talks about different degrees of it, but 15 degrees is usually what he talks about. And I think that in terms of like these date ranges that I'm going to say, oh, actually, yeah, it even says right here, the Uranus-Pluto cycle, axial alignments. An axial alignment means starting from the point where one of the planets is, the other one is straight across or at the same point. It's
Okay.
either in conjunction or directly opposite in opposition.
Okay.
And so it gives ranges from 1450 to 1461. That was a 15 degree. That was the 15 degree section. So that's what that refers to. So from 1960 to 1972 was that 15 degree conjunction. 1960 to 1972 was a noteworthy time for a lot of reasons, but in terms talking about space specifically, that was when we were most active in like first getting into space and getting to the moon. 1961 was the first space flight. The first moon landing was in 1969, and the last moon landing was in 1972. So, well, there's been some more recently, but from that sort of wave of them. So that all happened within the Uranus-Pluto conjunction,
Yeah.
Uranus being revolution and innovation, and then Pluto being intensifying. 1896 to 1907 was another conjunction that was associated with flight. The Wright brothers took their first flight,
Right.
and the first Zeppelin was also piloted in that same range. Like, is there another word for it? A blimp?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I did not know that's what a Zeppelin was.
No, no.
No. Did you know that word?
Led Zeppelin is like a joke because it wouldn't work.
They spelled lead wrong then, didn't they?
Maybe I don't even get it.
Maybe they're talking about the fact that a blimp was led in a certain direction.
That's probably what they mean.
Yeah, probably leading a blimp.
Yeah, I'm not very bright.
They should have called the band Leading a Blimp. Would
be better.
You could have saved face.
1450 to 1461, the Gutenberg press was invented. So that's when
Wow,
we first
first
had
printing
the printing press.
in the West.
Are you saying that there was a printing press
Yeah.
earlier that you're aware of?
Not a printing press, but the East was already manufacturing scripts, yeah.
Like with a machine, not with just writing it over and over again?
Yeah, they had a machine that worked a lot differently than the Gutenberg press, but I don't
Interesting.
remember how it worked.
Huh.
But yeah, they were manufacturing scripts before then.
Cool.
I only know that because I got in an argument with a pastor over it. Actually, no, I didn't. It was a pastor I argued with all the time, and I let this one go. But she said that the Bible was the first book ever printed, and I was like, God, you don't know how old China is, you fucking... But I didn't bring that one up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, those are the Uranus-Pluto examples that I have specifically.
And the 60s, God, there was so much more than just going to space. There was the civil rights, there was the sexual revolutions, psychedelic revolutions.
Right, and that's discussed a bit
mess.
too, like the sexual revolution stuff, because right after the contraceptive, right after we had like birth
Right.
control pills, then all of a
Right.
sudden women can have sex as much as they want now.
Right.
And that leads to that. I believe it even mentioned that like the when it actually peaked was summer of '69, which was when Woodstock
Wow.
happened, and I think that was considered kind of like when the hippie revolution ended around that time.
I don't know. I really
Think
don't know
so.
my hippie history.
Does that sound right? Yeah. All right.
What else was it during the 60s? Oh, and then there's, do you know anything about the technological revolutions in the 60s? Do you remember that part? Well, besides the space one.
No, I don't remember any other technological stuff that happened at the same time.
I didn't write down
specifically.
notes about it that I could present. Just wrote down just enough that I couldn't say anything useful.
Just enough that you could kind of prompt me.
Tell Raleigh to talk about technological revolutions.
I don't know. Also, noteworthy moon landing. There was what they refer to as a grand cross.
Oh, right.
Oh wait, no. Sorry, that was not the Grand Cross. Grand Cross was 9/11. We'll talk about that in a minute. The moon landing happened when there was a Grand Cross, and a Grand Cross means there are 4 planets, and they're all 90 degrees from each other.
Right.
So they're across from each other. Uranus and Jupiter are across from each other, and Pluto and the Moon were across from each other I might have that wrong. No, God damn it, I'm doing Grand Cross again. It was conjunction of 4 things at once. So what it was Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto, and the moon.
Okay.
All 4 of those things were in conjunction.
Mm-hmm.
They were all aligned when we landed on the moon,
Wow.
which is very interesting.
That's
Pluto
ridiculous.
being intensifying, Jupiter being about culture and knowledge, Uranus being revolution. And I don't really know what the moon is, but that's where we landed, so it's pretty relevant.
The moon is like the yin, the feminine. That's all I got. I don't know what I'm reaching for. That's all I know.
But it's also the moon. and
Oh,
we were going to the
let
moon.
me see if I remember more if I touch the book. This book is so fucking hard, dude.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
totally convinced that astrology is real and astrology is valid. I still think most people who talk about astrology are annoying. Just like I still think most people who talk about Christianity are annoying. And
I
I
know
think
they didn't
that's
get
real.
through this book any more than the
just-
Christians got through theirs.
Damn it, dude.
So yeah, that just happened with the moon landing.
Do you remember, speaking of crosses and Christianity, do you remember what the astrological event with Jesus was? Talked about there was one astrological event that occurred for both Jesus and Socrates. I thought that was super interesting.
No, I don't remember Jesus getting mentioned.
I
No.
think I did write this one down.
Cool.
I wrote down Jesus and Socrates' death.
Did you write a page number?
No.
Is there an index in this thing?
Oh, there is.
There
yeah.
is. Yeah, that's the answer. All right, you look that up. Or we'll both look it up.
Yeah, might as well, dude.
Well, he's been mentioned a lot of times. Probably 233 or 273.
273 would be it. Yeah, Saturn, Pluto. The characteristic upsurge of religious conservatism that coincides with Saturn-Pluto alignments often manifests in books and films that emphasize the... Oh, no, that's... Okay, so it wasn't... What was the other one? It's not 273.
233.
Because 273 is talking about The Passion of the Christ being a movie that emphasizes the conservatism and suffering of the Christian story. And Mel Gibson was born on the Saturn-Pluto alignment.
Oh, right.
Crazy
Yeah, I remember that
bastard.
bit. Looking back even further, we find Saturn and Pluto were also in hard aspect in 339 BCE, the year of Socrates' trial and death in Athens, when he was condemned for impiety and corruption of youth through his philosophical teachings.
Yeah, and then right before that it says, Saturn and Pluto were also in opposition from 28 to 31, the years to which many biblical historians assign the period of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. Characteristic themes of the Saturn-Pluto cycle are also evident in the spirit of... blah, 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 that's not the part. But Saturn, Pluto. So what's the personality of Saturn was conservatism?
Yeah.
Pluto was emphasized. So why would Saturn and Pluto being aligned, lining up with the death of Jesus be significant?
Oh, with the death of Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, because that's the state crushing a liberal uprising.
Right. That's the
a
tyrannical
revolution.
conservative energy
Yeah.
stomping on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Saturn, Pluto. I have a few examples of that. George Orwell wrote 1984.
Oh, yeah, that shit's crazy.
George Orwell wrote 1984 in the conjunction of Saturn, Pluto between 1946 and 1948. He set the book in the very next conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in 1984.
Did he? God, that's so crazy.
It is really
You
interesting.
think he knew, or do you think his intuition just happened to guide him to land that way? I tend to think the latter, but
Yeah, I've never heard that he was into astrology or anything.
why would you? Do you know anything about George Orwell?
No, but I figured if he was, it would have been mentioned in this book by now.
Probably.
Yeah.
He's brought up George Orwell a couple of times, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
So it's probably just where he guessed it would be It's probably just like, I don't know, seems like probably 40 years from now, we'll all be slaves, something
Yeah.
like that.
It's funny how intuition can get really, 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 really close to the truth, you know, rather than trying to reason things out. Like there's times that comedians say shit off the top of their head, you know, and they just like expose, you know, a hidden truth, just kind of jokingly, just speaking from intuition and bullshitting. It's like, it really be like that sometimes.
Sure. Yeah. And then, the Grand Cross that I wanted to talk about was on 9/11, there was a Grand Cross of Saturn and Pluto were across from each other, and then 90 degrees from them, the Sun and Moon were also aligned.
Jeez.
So Sun and Moon, Saturn, Pluto. And the book discusses that, like, leading up to this, there was a lot of astrologers that were talking about that day, that were saying, like, no, something weird is coming. And a lot of people were speculating that a terrorist attack was actually coming on that day.
Wow.
It says that some publicly, some privately, but there's a lot of examples of it out there where people were expecting something to happen. And something did. There was actually there was a plane crash, I think.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Everybody okay?
Not so much. Not great.
The meanings in numbers are so interesting too. The fact that 911 is the number that we associate with emergency, and that date happens to align with that Grand Cross and that huge historical terrorist attack is just so bizarre.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You know, it's not like anybody said, okay, well, let's call the emergency number 911 because that's going to be that date in the year 2001 of that Grand Cross. Probably something, you know, that's kind of an emergency will happen. It's like, we just do shit for reasons we don't really know, and then it turns
what
out.
would be the reason to pick 911? Why pick that? Why not pick 999?
Right.
Probably because 911 is less. 111 would be pretty easy to do on accident.
Yeah.
There's probably logic.
Right, but there's so many. Okay, let's not speculate about why the number 911 is. I'm about to just start making shit up and being like, well, it's probably. I don't know. But so something else that struck me as interesting when it comes to like things we do on intuition that turns out to be meaningful, but we didn't really know it would be. It's like the fact that we record our birth times. Like I've never thought of why it would even make sense to write down the time that you were born, but it's a significant event, right? So it's like if you have a kid, like, well, write down the time that they were born. Like, why? Who cares what time they were born? What does that have to do with anything? Like, well, it's significant. Just write it down. Like we don't know. But now looking back, I'm glad that I know I was born at 8:28 p.m. so I can look into where the stars were when I was born. But, you know, it's not like our parents and the hospital were like, hey, make sure you write down that number so he can use it for his natal chart in the future. You know, they're just like, it's important, so let's write it down.
Yeah.
Even though there's no rational reason to think it's important, it's just an intuitive thing. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I can see reasons that it would be practically useful
Like
in
what?
terms, record keeping for the hospital, trying to like have a solid timeline of like when things happened within the hospital, because that could be useful for a lot of reasons, keeping track
but
of
putting it on
hours
the
and-
birth certificate, it's like, here's your certificate. Here's your name. Here's where you were born. Here's the date, and here's the time. And here's your parents' names. Here's your birth certificate.
Yeah.
Like, there's something that we say is significant about it. This is the certificate. Like, this paper signifies the fact that you were born. Here's the important details of your birth.
Yeah.
Here's where, when, what time you were born. You know what? Isn't that kind of interesting?
I mean, I think it's plausible that it's because of astrology that enough people want to know that for the astrological reasons of, like, people have been into studying the stars and when the stars were aligned for a long time.
Yeah, maybe.
So it could be partly because of that.
Yeah.
But now we're just wildly speculating about another thing.
I think it's because, like, it's got to be a number that's easy enough to push, but not easy enough that you'd push it on accident.
Yeah.
And so it's just right in there because the 9 is at the bottom right and
Sacred
the 1
geometry?
is at the top left.
Could be sacred geometry.
Exactly.
Sacred numbers.
Because on the phone pad, 1 and 9 are in opposition. And so it's a symbol of opposition.
Yeah.
When you have an emergency, you got to go to the 9 and the 1.
Right. 9 is emergency and 1 is amplifying.
Exactly.
And it amplifies it twice. So that's what's up with Saturn and Pluto.
That's all my notes.
Jupiter, Uranus. Jupiter is associated with culture and knowledge. And from 1775 to 1776, they were in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we declared independence and we started fighting the British.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Or we were probably fighting them before that, I guess. And I already discussed the other one.
That's interesting, like the Jupiter part of it, because our revolution was so about like we have our own ideas. You know, like it was so idea driven. It's like, no, we have a new idea for how to do this. We're fucking doing it on our own.
Yeah.
It was super philosophy, idea driven. So very Jupiter-y.
Yeah.
A very Jupiter-y revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and related directly to culture. We have a new idea about culture, so fuck you.
Yeah.
That's the most Jupiter-Uranus thing ever.
Yeah, we want to do the whole thing different. We don't want to even be close to having a king.
Were you referencing Lil Dicky on purpose?
No, I don't even know what you're saying.
when he does professional rapper with Snoop Dogg, I want to do the whole thing different.
Different. How? Well,
that's all I know.
Something like that.
Actually,
so astrology, probably real.
Yeah, I'm convinced.
Yeah,
I'm convinced. But
I'm not sure what else I want to talk about.
Okay, so I do want to talk about the fact that like the 12 fundamental forces thing is super interesting. It's something I'm going to be chewing on for a while. So Carl Jung is my favorite psychologist. A lot of people's favorite psychologist. Seems like he's gaining in popularity too. Like he said a bunch of wild shit that was way ahead of his time, and now people are going back and mining through what he said. And we've gotten onto him through Jordan Peterson. Can't do an episode without mentioning him.
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, yes.
Jordan Brian Peterson.
I've looked it up before. I don't remember, though.
Same, and me neither.
Yeah, cool.
But anyway, Jung concluded that there were 12 archetypal forces governing the human psyche, and that information is useful because if we come to understand the group of motivations that make up our mind and our personality, then we can learn how to bring them into a more harmonious community, so to speak. Just like if you're a teacher of a classroom and you've got 12 students and you know all 12 of their personalities, you can understand how to run that classroom. And if you don't understand, you know, your rage, or you don't understand your lust, or you don't understand your drive for knowledge, or like there's some aspect of you that you're not familiar with or you don't get, then it has the ability to exist in the shadow of your psyche, or exist in the space of your psyche you're not aware of, and then kind of just pop out and do what it wants. And so people will do things and then look back and just like, how could I even possibly have done that? What the fuck? You know, they can't even look in the mirror anymore. Like veterans, for example, that come back from a war situation where they did things that are unspeakable in this cultural context, and they look over and they're like, who even was I? You know? So it's beneficial to understand all the forces that govern you, understand the depth and complexity of your multifaceted personality. And Jung said there were 12 fundamental archetypes that made up a human psyche. And I don't know if he based them on the Greek gods and goddesses, but they line up with the Greek gods and goddesses, which is interesting because the Greeks were saying that there were 12 fundamental forces that governed reality itself. And then now astrology is saying there are 12 regions of the cosmos that we're spiraling through that each have their own character or personality, and when we're lined up with one or the other, we can see the character of that region of the cosmos.
So you're talking about like the signs here?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about the houses, which I believe are actual areas of the cosmos that the Earth is moving through. I don't know if I understand that correctly.
That sounds right, yeah.
That there's 12 houses that we're moving through, and then at the same time, there are 12 celestial bodies, nine of which are planets?
Well, I mean,
it's the
we only
9
really talk
planets,
about
the sun,
10.
the moon.
We talk about the 8 other planets besides us and the sun and the moon. So
Right,
we really
right.
only talk about 10 up to this point, at least.
Right. So there's 12 signs, which each line up with a house, and then there's 10 celestial bodies. And so if you're, God, astrology is difficult to grasp. So instead of going there, let's just leave it at the signs which represent areas of the cosmos that
Yeah.
we go through that each have their own character or
Yeah.
personality. I'm just trying to say that it's interesting that in Greek mythology and in Jungian psychology and in astrology, it is said that there are 12 fundamental forces that make up the character of being.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
interesting. And then in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's this huge significance of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the story is Abraham is going to be the father of nations, right? And then he has a kid, Jacob. And then Jacob is this great man that wrestles with God or grapples with being, is what it's symbolic of. But then he has 12 children, and each of those children then represents each of the 12 tribes of Israel. So that's a quick, dumb summary, but there's the father, and then the father gives birth to something, and then that something, Jacob, gives birth to these 12, and then the 12 govern. But then, so this is an interesting synchronicity I told you about earlier. I was in the theater earlier. We're here in Uptown Theater / East Lake Church. I was here hanging out, reading in the lobby earlier. I was thinking about this whole 12 forces thing, 12 Greek gods, 12 Jungian archetypes, 12 astrological bodies. What does this mean? What does the 12 tribes of Israel thing mean? So I called Brent, my pastor, and I'm like, hey, tell me about the 12 tribes of Israel. Tell him kind of the ideas that I'm working on. As I'm on the phone with him, a choir marches by outside singing Noel. And Noel is a song that has a line in it that says, born is the king of Israel. And I'm calling Brent to ask him about what it means that there were 12 tribes of Israel that Jesus was the king of. The reason I was curious about that was because, as far as I know, the primary religious system of the Greeks was Greek mythology until Christianity was born. And it's like we as people have been trying to figure out what we should orient ourselves to or what we should worship, which I think are two ways to describe the same thing. And we got to a place where we're like, okay, well, what governs us? What controls us? Well, rage does. Well, lust does. Well, intellect does. Well, all of these 12 forces govern and rule us, and you can worship one or the other, but what should we really follow? We should follow whatever is the glue that holds all of those things together. And so I have a book in my Amazon cart about the evolution from Greek mythology to the worshiping of the thing that Jesus embodied or the thing that Jesus revealed to us. I haven't read it yet. It might be next on my list because I'm really interested in that. But then I'm also curious about what it means that Jesus was prophesied to be the king of Israel, and Israel was made up of 12 tribes. All of that's super fascinating to me. And I feel like getting to know what those 12 personalities are is so significant. If you're a Western mind, and that was the foundational religious system of the Greeks that our culture evolved from, it's interesting for that reason.
Yeah.
If you're into astrology, it's interesting for that reason. If you're into psychology, you should read what the smartest psychologist ever said was the 12 fundamental forces of the psyche. Regardless, it's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I
And what's
would-
at the center of that? What's the glue that holds all that together?
Right.
And does Jesus represent that? And how do we become that?
Yeah.
So that's what's driving me as a Christian to understand these forces.
Yeah. The notion that there are that 12 archetypes of people or of I guess forces recurs so much. It makes me think of the idea that a lot of different religions are talking about the same kind of thing through their different cultural lens. That a lot of different prophets are in touch with the same god or the same lowercase gods and are talking about the same kind of thing, but they just got a different word for it.
Yeah.
I think that that's probably true in
Yeah.
some cases. I'm very interested in Greek mythology, and I'd love to do a book on that at some point.
Yeah.
Because there's just a lot of things that I feel like point me in that direction. Like talking about astrology stuff very much points me in that direction because I want to understand these gods and their relationship to the planets, because each of the 10 planets that we discuss, they line up with one of the Greek gods.
Right.
So I'd be curious to know which ones they don't, which ones are missing from those,
Right.
if they all align. And I'm also interested in it for alien reasons, that I've heard people discuss the Greek gods as potentially being actual beings that were here, maybe the same kind of sons of God that are referenced in the Bible, that they're like an alien or lowercase god race that were here at some point and actually were screwing with us, and they actually have particular interests, which, I don't know, I guess they could be real things that embody those personalities. Like they're the things that actually have those personalities or representations of them.
They're like Christs from that celestial body. You know, like they are.
What do you mean?
When I say a Christ, I mean like Jesus is supposedly the human embodiment of the creator or the
Oh,
universal
sure.
glue, or I
Yeah.
don't give a fuck what you want to call it, but that
Yeah.
thing that we all came from, and Jesus supposedly embodies that perfectly. That Neptune could send, a
Yeah.
spokesperson, the
Yeah.
same way that I think that God sent a spokesperson, or Jupiter could send a Jupiter Christ.
Totally.
Like
Yeah, someone that perfectly represented
yeah, that's what I mean.
culture and knowledge.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'm the word Christ in a way doesn't apply to. I'm just playing with the word, but
Yeah, no, I get your metaphor though.
Yeah.
Embodiment sent here to represent something bigger, just like
Right.
Jesus was representing God.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a Trump is kind of a Saturn symbol. Like a Trump is kind of a just like such a
Yeah.
hard-headed,
Yeah.
stubborn, like power grabbing asshole that is just like he just so embodies that. What
Law
did
and
you?
order.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Law and order, folks. There's some things about what he's done that you could say are revolutionary in a Uranus kind of way, but he's just so like the stepdad that moves in and just enforces rules.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And what were you
very-
saying about this? Was it Saturn and sorry, say what you were going to say first. And then I was curious about the alignment that's coming up on the 21st with Saturn and something else.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say about Trump that like, yeah, he's very much well, obviously conservative. He represents that. And if you were looking at him in a negative light, repressive even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you say repressive, I would think the word oppressive. What does repressive mean exactly?
I think of
As I think oppressive, like he seems like the character that wants to exert control. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when I think of the word repressive, I think of something pushing something in, but it's like within itself. So either a person repressing something within themselves or a society repressing something within the society, repressing like
okay.
an ideology within the society, pushing that down.
So like the liberals are saying let's expand ideology, and he's saying like let's contract
Yeah.
ideology.
Yeah. And when I think of oppressive, I think of specifically it being towards someone else or something else.
Oh, right.
Which I guess, depending on how you wanted to view it, you could say that Trump is oppressing a group of people that has nothing to do with him, or that he is repressing something within.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Well, but the Sean sent me this the other day. It was that for the first time in 800 years, the Christmas star or Star of Bethlehem will be visible in the night sky. And that was Jupiter and Saturn lining up on December 21st. But it's going to be alignment that's different than other alignments. It's not a regular alignment in that, like, on the chart, they're going to be at the same point. It's an alignment as in you can look at the sky and you're going to see, oh, there's those two planets. They're, like, right next to each other. And you're just going to be able to see that. And that hasn't happened in 800 years. And we were discussing like the possible implications of something like that.
Yeah, like the sort of events that could happen on Earth that would reflect the character
right.
of Saturn and what?
Jupiter.
Saturn and Jupiter, yeah.
So Saturn and Jupiter being in like super alignment on December 21st is interesting. Jupiter represents culture and knowledge. Saturn represents conservatism, repression. So we're speculating about what kind of stuff could happen that would line up with that. And that could be something related to Trump, related to the election.
Yeah.
Either that it becomes maybe more widely held belief that he did win, or that states actually flip towards him, or it could be that in terms of like something repressive happening, it could be that Trump deploys like
martial law.
Yeah,
because martial law is like the ultimate conservative tyrannical move.
Yeah.
Like the government is saying, sorry, we got to take away everybody's keys.
Yeah.
This is super serious.
Right. We gotta. Like, if he does that, then I guess the idea would be that he's trying to take control of the bad stuff that happened within the election, or if you don't believe him, then he was trying a coup.
Right.
But yeah, that could be. If so, something interesting
Yeah.
happens on December 21st, we'll keep that in mind.
Whether you think that Biden cheated and Trump was the rightful winner, or you think like those are crazy conspiracy theories and Biden just won and Trump's too butthurt, like no matter which side you are on that, like it could be that that conjunction means that Trump makes a power move.
That
Whether that's a
something
good or a
happens-
bad thing in your worldview.
Yeah, something that benefits conservatism or
Yeah.
repression otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that Trump's going to serve a second term. And right now is the craziest time for me to say that because it's been
bold.
it's been like 3 or 4 weeks since Biden was announced the winner. But there's a lot of Christian prophets who have said that Trump is going to serve 2 terms before it was viable that he was ever going to be the president in the first place. It was fucking crazy when they said it. And so with this conjunction happening and with the amount of evidence that there was voter fraud and the unbelievably small amount of attention that the media has given to the evidence that does exist, but the amount of evidence that there is, and the prophetic stuff. So like listening to Christian prophets and looking at what's happening politically and looking at the conjunctions, like, yeah, this guy's going to serve a second term.
Maybe.
Like,
if he does, it very much solidifies. It's more evidence towards this for me.
but not necessarily, like even Trump wouldn't have to serve a second term to provide evidence of this. If Trump does anything extreme and power grabbing, but Trump doing something extreme and power grabbing isn't a miracle.
Stars all over.
Kind of is putting his name on shit as his career. So
hey, there's a couple stars aligned somewhere, folks.
it's it's Saturn, Jupiter somewhere. Yeah.
Well, so I guess next week we will talk about the last 2 parts of this book. So it'll be a little bit shorter, and I think thematically different. When we were picking out which chapters, we kind of deliberately picked that like these 3 looked like they were going to be the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we lumped that all together. So hopefully the other 2 are a little bit different.
Yeah. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention I thought was really interesting. So Karl Marx was born with Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto all in hard aspect. I don't know if that means conjunction or opposition.
Hard aspect is opposition, conjunction, or square.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Saturn is tyranny and conservatism. Uranus is liberalism, and then Pluto is extreme.
Yeah.
Right? And so Karl Marx being born with those in hard aspect is pretty interesting because he was an extreme tyrannical liberal. Like he was like, let's have so much change happen that I get to be in control of everything. Fuck everybody else. It's like the worst of conservatism and the worst of liberalism in one guy in the most extreme way possible. It's just
extremely liberal policies that got to the point where, hey, I'm on top of it. It's all ordered under me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the top 3 most extreme examples of that ever, that guy is.
Yeah.
That was a Yoda sentence, but
we got there.
Yeah, we don't need to ramble about this subject. We half understand for any longer than 48 minutes. Let's get the fuck out of here.
Cool.
But it's been really fun to read. There's going to be books where we're straggling through, and I'm just glad we only have 20 listeners right now.
Night school?
Night school, dude.